The storm came down hard over the plains, turning the dirt road into mud and the sky into iron. Caleb Holt was fixing the south fence when he saw her, collapsed against the post, hair soaked, dress torn, one bare foot bleeding. He didn't ask questions. He never did anymore. Caleb lifted her easily, carrying her to the ranch house that had been too quiet for too many years. She burned with fever, whispered words he couldn't catch, and clutched his shirt like letting go meant dying. He cleaned her wound, wrapped her foot, and sat by the bed as the storm passed. At dawn, she finally slept. When she woke, her eyes snapped open in panic, until she saw him standing back, giving her space. You're safe," Caleb said simply. "We're at my ranch." He studied him, wary but exhausted. "Why?" she asked. He shrugged. "Because you needed help." That night, as her fever broke, she murmured in her sleep. Just one word. A name. Caleb froze when he heard it, because no one on this land, no one alive, was supposed to know that name the next morning. She introduced herself as Elena. No last name, no past she was willing to share. Caleb didn't push, but the name she'd whispered echoed in his mind like a gunshot. Samuel, his brother's name. Samuel Holt had vanished 15 years ago, leaving behind blood in the dirt and questions no one dared ask. The town believed he was dead. Caleb had buried him in his heart the day the sheriff stopped searching. Yet this stranger had spoken his name like a memory, not a rumor. Elena noticed Caleb watching her more closely now, guarded, alert. When she asked what was wrong, he shook his head. "Nothing that concerns you." But the ranch felt different. Caleb started locking doors at night. Elena caught him checking the horizon with a hand always too close to his gun. Finally, she spoke the truth she'd been holding back. "I didn't come here by accident," she said quietly. "I was running. From men who think I know something I shouldn't." Caleb met her eyes. "About who?" She swallowed. "About Samuel Holt." Silence fell heavy between them. The past had found him. Caleb took Elena to the old barn, the one he hadn't opened since the day Samuel disappeared. Dust coated everything, but the memories were sharp as knives. "My brother wasn't a good man at the end," Caleb admitted. "He got mixed up with dangerous people." Elena nodded. "I know. He saved my life once, and before he disappeared, he left me something." She pulled a small leather journal from her coat, weathered hidden, protected at all costs. Inside were names, routes, payoffs, proof that Samuel Holt had been planning to expose a powerful land syndicate that controlled half the county. "And they're still looking for this," Elena said. Elena said. "And now they know I'm alive." Caleb closed the journal slowly. "Then they're coming here." That night, headlights appeared at the edge of the ranch. Caleb loaded his rifle. Elena stood beside him, no longer just a woman he'd taken in, but someone tied to his past and his future. As the engine's cut-in boots hit the ground, Caleb made a choice he'd avoided for years. He would finish what his brother started, and this time, he wouldn't lose her. If you want, I can. Continue with episodes 4-6, rewrite this as a screenplay, make it darker, more romantic, or more action-driven, turn it into a short novel or series pitch. Just tell me the direction you want. The storm had come out of nowhere, rolling over the plains with a low, angry growl that made the cattle restless and the sky bruise dark. Caleb Holt worked the south fence anyway. Hands numb, hat pulled low against the rain. He noticed her only because she didn't move. A shape slumped against the far post, half hidden by the sheets of rain, too still to be livestock, and too small to be debris. When he got closer, he saw she was a woman. Soaked through, dress torn at the hem, dark hair plastered to her face. One foot was bare and bleeding, the skin raw from miles of walking. Her eyes fluttered when he spoke, unfocused and burning with fever. She tried to say something, but her legs gave out before the words did. Caleb caught her without thinking. She was lighter than she should have been, all bone and shaking breath. He didn't ask who she was or where she came from. He hadn't asked questions like that in a long time. He carried her to the house, mud on his boots, rain dripping from his coat onto the wooden floor that had known only one set of footsteps for years. He laid her on the spare bed, the room that still smelled faintly of soap and dust, and worked in silence. He cleaned the wound on her foot, wrapped it carefully, and brought water to her cracked lips. She clutched his sleeve when he tried to pull away, fingers trembling, fear sharp even through the fever. "Oh, you're safe," he told her, unsure when those words had last been true for anyone under his roof. Night settled in heavy and quiet after the storm passed. The house creaked, the wind whispered, and Caleb sat in a chair beside the bed, watching her chest rise and fall. She muttered in her sleep, fragments of dreams or memories he couldn't piece together. Then, just before dawn, she whispered one clear word. A name, Samuel. The sound hit him like a blow. Recorder. His breath caught, and his hand tightened on the chair arm. No one spoke that name anymore. Not in town. Not on this land. Not since the blood and the dirt and the search parties that came back empty. The woman slept on, unaware of the weight she'd dropped into the room. Caleb stood slowly, every instinct awake now, eyes fixed on her face as if it might change into a ghost. He had taken her in without questions. Now he knew the past had followed her to his door. Morning came pale and cold, the kind that crept in quietly and left no warmth behind. Caleb was already awake, coffee untouched on the table, his eyes drifting again and again toward the closed door of the spare room. The name still echoed in his head, sharp and impossible. He told himself it meant nothing, that fever made people say strange things, but his gut knew better. When she finally emerged, she moved carefully, favoring her bandaged foot. She had washed her face, and without the dirt and blood she looked younger than he'd expected, though there was something worn in her eyes that sleep hadn't touched. She hesitated when she saw him, as if gauging whether he was a threat or a shelter. "I'm Elena," she said. "Thank you, for last night." Caleb nodded, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. Her relief was quick but guarded. She sat at the table, hands wrapped around the mug he slid toward her. He noticed how she watched the windows, the door, the wide stretch of land beyond, as if expecting it to turn against her at any moment. The day passed in uneasy calm. Caleb worked the ranch, fixing what the storm had broken, but his attention kept drifting. More than once, he caught her standing on the porch, scanning the horizon. She asked no questions about him, and he offered none in return. Still, something had shifted. He locked the doors that night, something he hadn't done in years. As darkness settled, Elena finally spoke the truth she'd been circling all day. "I didn't end up here by accident," she said quietly, standing in the doorway while Caleb cleaned his rifle. "I'm running." He didn't look up. "Most people are. Oh, they're looking for me," she continued. "Men who don't ask politely." Caleb met her gaze then, measuring her words. "And what do they think you have?" She swallowed, fingers curling into her sleeve. "Information." The silence stretched. Outside, coyotes cried in the distance, their voices thin and sharp. Caleb felt the old tension settle into his bones, the kind that came before trouble. Finally, he said it. "Last night, you said a name." Her eyes widened, and the color drained from her face. "You heard that." "A Samuel," he said. Elena's breath hitched. She looked away toward the dark window. "Well, because he saved my life," she whispered. "And because what he left behind is the reason I can't stop running." Caleb stood slowly, every muscle tight. "Samuel Holt was my brother." The words hung between them, heavy and final. Elena's gaze snapped back to his, fear and recognition colliding. Before either of them could speak again, distant headlights flickered across the far pasture, and Caleb knew the ghosts of his past were no longer content to stay buried. Caleb didn't move as the headlights crept along the edge of the pasture, their beams cutting through the darkness like searching fingers. He killed the lamp and stepped closer to the window, rifle resting against his shoulder. Elena stood frozen behind him, the weight of what she'd revealed settling in her chest like a held breath. "They won't stop," she said softly. "Not now." Caleb didn't argue. He had learned long ago that some men only understood force, and some debts didn't stay paid just because time passed. He gestured for her to follow him and led her across the yard to the old barn, the boards groaning, as if protesting being woken from a long sleep. Dust swirled in the beam of his flashlight, and the familiar smell of hay and rusted iron pulled memories from the corners of his mind. "This is where he used to work," Caleb said, voice low. "Before everything went wrong." Elena hesitated, then reached into the lining of her coat and pulled out a small leather journal, its edges worn smooth by handling. She held it like something alive. "Samuel gave me this," she said. "He told me if anything happened to him, I was to keep it hidden. And if I couldn't, I was to find you." Caleb took the journal slowly. Inside were names, dates, land deeds, and routes scribbled in his brother's unmistakable hand. Proof of bribes, stolen property, and men who thought the county belonged to them. His jaw tightened as he read. Samuel hadn't been running from trouble. He'd been walking straight into it. The sound of engines shutting off echoed across the land. Doors slammed. Voices carried on the wind. Voices carried on the wind. Elena's hands shook. They killed him for this, she said. And now they think I can lead them to it. Caleb closed the journal and met her eyes. Then they picked the wrong place. He handed her a spare revolver and showed her how to hold it. His movements calm, deliberate. Outside, boots crunched against gravel. Someone called out his name, too familiar to be coincidence. Caleb felt something settle inside him, hard and clear. He had spent years trying to forget, to believe survival was enough. But Samuel hadn't died for silence. And this woman hadn't crossed half the state to be abandoned now. As the men approached the barn, Caleb stepped forward, rifle steady, the land stretching wide and unforgiving behind him. The past had finally come home. And this time, Caleb was ready to meet it head-on. The men didn't bother knocking. The barn doors shuddered as a fist struck wood, followed by a voice thick with confidence and threat. Caleb recognized it at once. Hank Mercer, a name that carried weight in the county, the kind that opened doors and buried problems. Hey, Caleb, Hank called. We just want to talk. We just want to. Caleb stepped into the lantern light, rifle lowered but ready. Elena stayed behind him, her grip tight on the revolver, breath shallow but steady. Years ago, Caleb might have believed in talk. Tonight, he believed in distance and cover. You're trespassing, Caleb said, a turnaround. Hank chuckled, boots scraping forward. Still guarding ghosts? That woman belongs to us. She's carrying something that isn't hers. Caleb felt the familiar heat rise in his chest. Everything Samuel touched was his business. The name wiped the smile from Hank's face. For a moment, the past flickered in his eyes before hardening into resolve. Your brother should have stayed quiet. That was all Caleb needed to hear.